Hey, everybody, this is Travis from Author Eke, and it's a new year, 2013, and I couldn't have thought of a better place to start it, but in Paris. So I want to introduce you to Phil Wray here. Him and we met at a book kind of a signing at a library in Coppell, Texas, which is between Fort Worth and Dallas. And we had the booth next. And he had a book there, interesting. And I said, I want to get you on Author Eke because I want to start the year off right. So, Phil, go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us about your book.
Yeah. Well, as you said, name is Phillip Wray. I'm an attorney practicing in Dallas. I've been here pretty much my entire career, so going on 32 years. Primarily doing defense work on personal injury claims. I've been in the Coppell area for nearly 25 years, I think, so haven't moved around a whole lot. And the book that I guess we're going to talk about is my first one that was released back in September of last year. And I'll hold up a copy of it. It's the Pontcourt Murders. Takes place in France, part of it at least in Paris. Just had my second book, Murder in the Marais, or The Murder in the Marais, come out last week on Thursday, I think is when it went live on Amazon. So it came out a little faster than I expected. Went live a little faster. So I don't yet have my author copy of that, which I understand is a huge no-no.
So we can talk about both books. And Phil will not be giving any legal advice today, please. We're keeping it on strictly about literature and books. So nobody will pop any questions.
Absolutely. Besides, we'll keep it on something interesting instead of the law world.
So tell me, or tell us, how did you come up with this? And can I give it the background and the theme and where this takes place in the time period of the book?
Yeah. Well, I've always liked French like France and everything that flows from that, whether it's literature or architecture, art. The history just fascinates me. And France was for centuries kind of the center of either political thought or, fashion, just really influenced a lot of the rest of the world. So my wife and I were there on a trip in 2019, and we'd been there several times. So we wanted to do some sort of, not the standard Eiffel Tower or Louvre, which I mean are all wonderful, but we want to do some of the smaller tours, go to some of the smaller museums. And I love French literature. So I thought, well, there is a tour for just about everything in Paris. And I thought, well, some of the places mentioned in the Three Musketeers, which that series of books is one of my favorites. I thought, well, those still exist. So we'll find a Musketeers tour and go see, where did the historical D'Artagnan live? Where did the the one who's in the story based on the same character, but one's fictionalized. And I thought, well, we're going to do the whole Musketeers thing. And I couldn't believe they didn't have a Musketeers tour. So when we came back to the US, I thought, well, that might be interesting. I could do that. There's Hemingway tours, there's all these tours. I thought, I can research this, find out what buildings that are mentioned in the books or that actually in the true stories it still exist, turn it into a walking tour, because Paris at that time was, it's a walkable city now, but at that time was much more compact. And so did all the research, spent a few months with, finding out what buildings are still there, what buildings are now standing where an address was at the time, have my walking tour all together. And then COVID hit. So right as I was about to start marketing it as a potential tour possibility, and maybe working with a French tour company or with schools, whether it would be me going over there and doing it or hiring someone there, it all got shut down. So
that's such a great idea, though. I mean, who would have thunk it?
Well,
You know?
yeah, and someone's going to see it and run with it at some point, because I mentioned that on the podcast, but I still would love to do it.
Right.
I'm I've spent a lot of time in the area where the books take place and where the
Mhm.
actual musketeers were, and I think it's fascinating. But I had probably 200 pages of pictures and
Mhm.
maps and research, and had nothing to do with it. And after a few months, I started thinking I need to do something, because at that point I had no idea how long COVID and travel restrictions were going to last.
Yeah.
And like I said, I love French literature.
Mhm.
The other love I have is kind of the traditional mysteries, Agatha Christie's,
Mhm.
those kind. And I thought, well, maybe I can just take a stab at writing a book with a musketeer as the amateur sleuth and see what would happen. And that was kind of the genesis of it. I just
That's
sat
amazing.
down and spent a few weeks writing
Mm.
a story and thought, well, at that point, I really didn't know what I had, but
Mhm.
I thought it's something to do.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. So anybody looking to even fiction that's looking to write a book, there is just a ton of research that has to go into writing a book, because it has to become, except fantasy. I mean, probably even fantasy takes a lot of research, but definitely a fiction that you want to portray it as somewhat realistic takes a lot of research. And when I wrote my book, and my brother read it, he goes, "Wow, you did do research." Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a lot. There's a lot to it. So this takes place in what time period does this take
It
place?
would be 1636. The first book takes place in the fall of 1636. So under Louis the 13th.
Uh,
And like you're right about the research. The good thing was, by the time I started writing it, I knew I had a lot of the research done,
right.
not with this intent, but that certainly spurred things along.
That's great. And what's good about it, when you write a book 1630s in Europe, there's buildings that still exist. I go to Europe. I just got back from Europe for Christmas and New Year's, and you can walk around the cities in Germany, and there's these buildings from 1500s, from 1400s, and all the history there. It's amazing that you can go back and kind of retrace the steps of that.
Yeah, and there's been obviously tons of changes,
Mhm.
but some of the historical sites that have been preserved are great. But then if you go into the countryside, just a small village, there may be
Mhm.
a farmhouse that's been there since the 1300s.
Oh
It
yeah.
may, and it's not unusual. Whereas here in the Dallas area, well, we haven't been around that long, but
All right.
we scrape things off after 20 or 30 years.
And you go look at those older buildings in Europe. You look at it, and you go, "That's crooked," and it's still standing. And then my brother-in-law lives in a house in Coburg, Germany, that's in the middle of town, Stadtmitte. I bet that thing's from late 1600s. I mean, and it's still standing. You can tell, but I mean, it's very nice inside. But it's crazy with it when you think about that. So, had you ever thought about writing a book before, or just because the events precipitated you deciding to do something with the research that you did?
Probably, well, I think in high school, like most people, read Lord of the Rings and all that.
Yep.
And I thought, well, I could do that, which I couldn't. And
Right.
then early in my legal career, everyone wanted to be the next John Grisham. So I thought, well,
Uh-huh.
I've tried some cases and we've had some weird things happen in them.
Right.
So maybe do something with that. But just it never really caught my attention. And then you have kids, and you get you just don't have the free time that you once did,
Right.
or you don't make the free time, I guess is probably more accurate. Um,
But it takes
so
time. It takes time
yeah,
writing a book. I
so it
mean,
was after it was kind of my COVID project. We weren't going to court. I
yeah.
wasn't doing much traveling. Everything was, to the extent we were having hearings, they were by Zoom.
Mhm.
So I found myself with some free time right at the same time that I had all this research, and it just sort of, came together.
Huh. That's interesting. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what I did in the COVID time. I don't think I did anything productive. I think worked, and try to lose some weight. But other than that, I don't know. So you started out, just with some research because you had an idea, because you found something interesting that you think with other people would, that there was nothing there, right? And you want to make sure that you want to explain that there is not really a cat with the three Musketeers. Anyone was never a cat.
No,
You can prove that.
That is true. The research on it was pretty fascinating. There's to some extent you're a little limited if you're just a lay person like me. I can't go into certain libraries and look at collections, but I can look at a lot of secondary sources of professors who've looked at some of this.
Yeah.
So, that I ended up ordering quite a few books, like for instance, just day-to-day things. What did they eat? What did the rich people eat versus what did the poor people eat?
Cake.
You just don't know.
They had cake.
And you don't want to make a horrendous mistake. Say,
exactly.
Oh well, they had a baguette. Well, no, this didn't come along until a couple hundred years later, or 150 years. So I got a French cookbook from like the 1650s, and oh, wow. I mean it's a reprint, but it tells you, and it was really good about telling you at what time of year you would serve things because of what was available. So that again, you don't want to have your average person, including me, would read that they ate strawberries in the fall and not think anything of it.
Right.
There's going to be someone out there so like, no, wouldn't have
strawberries.
Yes,
there's always somebody.
Yeah, and so I did a fair amount of research like that. The firearms, I wasn't terribly well versed in those, so I had to do a little more research on that. But there's just tons of research that's available. So that was, so I wrote my story. No idea. I mean, kind of intuitively, some things about story structure. You got to have some event. The person is called in to investigate in some way, and he does his investigation, solves the crime. You got to have that kind of, just from reading books and watching movies, that's kind of how it goes. But I didn't know really anything about the craft of writing. So I wrote my story, had contacted a freelance editor just to say, I've got this. I don't know what it is or what to do with it. It was about 37,000 words, which to me, I thought, well, that's a huge book. And, find out, that's about half of what I need.
That's half a novel. That's a half a novel.
And she told me, find a book coach, someone that can teach you the craft, like how to structure a story, how to do your dialogue, not to, head hop between characters. And so I kind of, so I went about this the kind of backwards way. I researched, I wrote, then I figured out how I'm supposed to write, So
I've yet to do that.
What's that?
I figured out how to write. I just, do you outline?
I am not a very good outliner, which drives my book coach, who I've had since the beginning, or since I first started writing. It drives him nuts. He is a very, very structured writer. I tend to, and I don't write in order necessarily. I still think kind of in, I sort of know I'm going to have about 25 chapters. So I got to solve the crime, by chapter 20-ish. So I kind of know where things are going to fall, but I may be stuck on something in chapter 10 that just doesn't seem to work, but I've got a good idea on something around chapter 15. Right. So I'll skip ahead, write that. Then I might go back and redo chapter 5, and then I kind of hop around.
I do. It's called a pantser, by the way.
Yes. I'm
a pantser.
I am trying to get better at outlining, just because I think it will save some time.
Yeah.
But I'm sure you've seen it. There's some of these people that outline. They outline, then they outline more, and they keep fattening it up where they almost have a book, by the time. And I just haven't gotten anywhere near that.
Yeah, I don't outline. I kind of mind map some things, and I'll start, like I'll write stuff in a book, and I go, you know what? I don't want to use it in this book, so I'll push it away because I know I'm going to write another one, and I'll use it for that other one because I can build that out for that. Or I'll write the end first, and then to go in and write the beginning, and and move it around. But yeah, I don't outline. I just kind of write the clear conscious thought until I'm done with the thought. And
Right.
Then I'll look at something else to do.
Now, there's everyone's different,
Yeah.
and you just kind of have to go with what works. I think for me now, I will start outlining, but it's a very skimpy
Yeah.
outline, and there may not be anything. I know there's going to be a chapter 10 through 14, but there may not be anything written down there. But chapter 15, I've got an idea that X is going to happen. So, and then as I go, I may go back and fill in stuff just to make sure I've got some continuity in it. You don't want to have a character doing something, but he's really not introduced till a chapter later.
That's what I'll do is I'll use mind mapping to make sure that if I start it, that I've finished it out somewhere in the book or everything. And especially if you write like a second, I know you wrote a second book and it probably has the same characters in it. So how much do you reintroduce the characters? That's something that you have to look at too from a second book perspective.
Right. Yeah, that was and I wasn't sure because my books it's going to be a series. I've got the third one is going out. It's with beta readers right now, so it'll go out to the editor. The plan is for February and be maybe done by July. The fourth one I've gotten drafted, at least just the first draft, but each one could be picked up and read.
That's the important part.
Yeah, it doesn't. I mean, some of the character development and relationships grow or whatever, but you could just pick one up, like a Hercule Poirot book. You could just pick one of his up, and you don't necessarily know if it's the first or the 30th.
Exactly.
He sort of is what he is. He does his thing. Mine's not quite to that extent, so I do have to at least do some reintroducing.
Yes.
And I try to do it in my first chapter to have some kind of activity. Like, my book coach, and I'm sure other people call this a James Bond opening. It doesn't necessarily tie into the rest of the book, but it kind of shows who the people are and shows some of their skill sets, and they're doing something. And that kind of sets some of the tone for the rest of the book. And
I kind of reintroduce them along the way. And
yeah,
that's the hardest part. It was like when I wrote my second one is at the editor. I hope to have it out April or May or something. And it's the same team, but I grow the team.
Right.
So how much, and some other characters in the book, so how much do you introduce them without having to read, like somebody who read the first book, they're like, oh, I don't need to know all this all over again. So how much do you reintroduce them? And I think that's interesting. So do you have like a certain time you write? Like I can write, I like writing in the morning, and I like writing with music on.
It depends for me, just because the nature of my work. I usually have to get up and get going on it. I'm not one of those people that can get up at 5 or 4 in the morning and write for 2 hours.
No, I can't do that.
If I did, it would be incoherent. So I usually, but sometimes during the day, over lunch, or I'll have an idea in the morning. I think, okay, at lunch, I'm going to sketch this out. So turn off the computer, sketch that, or, kind of get an idea for the scene. But most of my writing is just after work. And I try to do it pretty early after I shut off work, just so I don't get distracted later on in the evening, making dinner or cleaning up or something. So, I bet if I ever tried to track it, probably most of my writing is between like 5 and 7 in the evening. And then, probably, well, sometimes though, you got to go to take care of other things. And then I've come back and write it, 10 to 11, maybe, just to sort of close whatever circle I'm working on.
Yeah, I think if you did an average of my time, probably 9:30 to 11:30, 12.
Right.
Because you know as well as I do, writing the book is almost the easy part. Once you get it out, how do you market? Well, what the most effective way to market? You could write the best thing since sliced bread, but if people don't know about it, it's tough. So you got to get it out. But how do you get it out without blowing a budget? Number one, and then, so you'll be interested enough to write another one. That's the thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's that is, I'm struggling with that right now. The first book was, I won't say easier, but I had really I almost had no expectations. I thought, I'm going to put it on Amazon. I have no idea if I'm going to sell any. I hear these horror stories of people saying, well, I sold 20 books. I'm like, oh crud, I want to do that. But
well, the average for a year for like a first time author or even an established is only like 250 to 500 copies of a book.
Yeah.
A year.
That
If you get
doesn't
over
surprise
5,000, that's when people start looking at you.
So the first book I did the whole thing where we had a, family and friends, like a book launch party at a, a winery, not like at the winery, but at their storefront. We didn't fly everyone to like San Francisco or anything. No. So we did
I want to be your friend.
Yeah. So, we had people in, and it sold a decent amount that way. But, there's only so many friends and family and coworkers that you have. And at some point, then you're like, okay, what about all these other people out there? So the first book, it's done okay, but I did almost zero marketing. The second book, I have actually hired a marketing company, and I'm just kind of curious to see how it goes. There was one I was looking at, and then I decided to go with this other, and I'm just going to see what happens. It's and if it doesn't work, that's fine. Then I know I've given it that shot. I may try the other company on the third book, but it may not. I mean, I may not
need it.
This may not be a million seller or 1,000 book seller. Who knows?
Are you self-published?
Yeah. So I do what I've got an editor who she's a freelance editor, but she does editing for publishing companies.
Okay.
And my proofreader also, she's freelance, but also does they both do work for traditionally published people, than people like me. And then I use a company to do the formatting.
Sure.
Now, I don't really have time or the will to learn how to format and how to do all the nuts and bolts stuff. So I try to outsource as much of that as I can.
Yeah, I believe it's like I don't do a lot of work around the house because I'm not very good at it, but there is people that are, and I pay for that.
Yeah.
I want it to actually work or last, right? So
right.
So do you you have anything book signings coming up, or where can people get a hold of you and stuff?
Yeah, well, I've got my website, which is the first book came out a lot faster than I thought. We were going through the editing process, the formatting process, and fortunately, when it got to the formatting, it was pretty clean, so it ended up coming out a lot faster than I thought.
Right.
And so we were scrambling as we were, I really didn't understand how to put it on Amazon or to have it. And the formatting company was taking care of that, but it went live also a lot faster than I thought. So we were frantically trying to get a website up, which is probably not the best way to do that.
You did it pretty quick.
Yeah. So I just put something together. So yeah, it's, Phillip Wray. It's Phillip with 2 L's and WRAY.com. So very simple, no frills. I'm about to work on that or have someone work on it because I don't have a facility for that.
But LinkedIn, I know you can be reached on LinkedIn because we're
LinkedIn. Yeah. And then my email is Phillip Wray, again, 2 L's and then WRAY author@gmail.com.
Okay.
And what's kind of interesting, sorry to get back to this, on the series stuff, they tell you really have to have, if lightning isn't going to strike like a Harry Potter or something, you really need to have a series if you want it to work.
Yes.
And I'm starting to see that now with the second. It's the first one. I don't know if you saw it this way. Pretty much everyone buys a copy, and you do your book signing, and people buy a copy, but then it starts trailing off.
Yeah.
And so my second book came out, and all of a sudden I've started seeing a very minor spike, but a spike nonetheless of sales of the first book. And I'm thinking, I don't know who those people are.
Yep.
My thought is they're people who are seeing the second one, and there's something's caught their interest in it, and they want to go back to the beginning.
I think that's true. What I've done differently this time is the first time I didn't try to pre-market at all, because I didn't know diddly squat, right? So this time, even though the book, still being edited, I'm already starting to market it, right? I'm telling people about the book and everything. I've got I got my websites, and it has it coming soon, and you'll be able to pre-order off my website, autograph copies or whatever. So I've learned that, and I've learned it takes time, right? You don't boil the ocean in a day. You don't need how to eat elephant, one piece at a time. And I think you're right about the series, because people can take up the second one, and if there's a first one, they want to know about that. But what I've done too is I've created a website for my team.
Yeah, I've seen that.
That's going to be where people want to learn about the members of the team. They're all clandestine operation people. There's no pictures. There's just silhouettes going to be out there. But you're going to be able to, what's their mission, what's their background, all these things. So they're going to take on a character of themselves, and that I think will help. And it's fun, which I'm in my early 60s, and for me to say technology is fun, you're like, oh, wow. Hey, generation that invented the internet, so good.
Yeah, true. Well, yeah, the marketing is something I've really not focused on.
I don't think anybody I don't think anybody knows how to crack it. I mean, I've got like Rocket Publisher or something. Do I go out and look at keywords, which ones I want to use and all that? But I don't think there is a Rosetta Stone for book marketing. If there is, then somebody's going to make a ton.
Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting. This one I'm going to put a little, I'm put it in the hands of someone who's going to put more effort into it, and we'll see. I think it's going to be probably Amazon ads. It'll be, he did the selecting of the different, what genres or categories that it's going to be.
That's key.
Yeah. Aside from the keywords, and we'll just see how it goes. I'm curious. I mean, for me, it's just fun. I've still got ideas for a couple more stories, and I've got some ideas for a couple of novellas, for some of the minor characters or secondary characters to have kind of their own little stories. And I mean, as long as I've had people to say they hadn't read a book in like 15 years, and they wouldn't have, except they felt like they should read mine since I know them, and I would be asking them if they read it, and they but they said they really liked it, and they're looking forward to the next book. And I think that's pretty cool, that someone who doesn't read is reading it and actually enjoying it.
Yeah, you make a good point. So don't feel bad when somebody just hates your book, right? Just some people just don't maybe not like anything, or wouldn't have for them or whatever. So you've got to learn to move on, because a lot of people do, and it feels good when somebody gives you a good review or likes your book or can't wait for your next book. And so so don't get down, folks, just because somebody's a Debbie Downer or a Karen. So.
Well, that's the thing. It's pretty easy on whether it's Amazon or whatever to put a negative comment. But I can tell you, I've become much more understanding now. If I'm read someone's and I say, oh, there's some typos here, or I am much less harsh than I would have been.
Than I was before.
Yes. Because even after it went through an editor, proofreader, and as it's formatting, every time someone touches your book, there's a chance for a new error to come in.
Yes.
And there was two errors after all that still slipped into my first book.
Mm.
And one of the first people that read it pointed it out to me, and I thought, oh, yeah, I can't
Nice.
believe it.
Nice.
And the problem is they were both errors that in the final round I was trying to clean up a couple of sentences
Yeah.
and didn't make it clear what I was doing to the formatter, and so they kept in a couple extra words. So there's not typos, it's just a couple words that are misplaced. So
yeah, I mean even the negative comments sometimes are like, okay, good comment. Now I need to know what I need to do next time.
yeah,
So figure it out. Yeah, so they're not necessarily like go and do it. It's just sometimes a negative comment is a good comment.
Well, and that it really, I don't know if you use beta readers, but I have for mine. And the first book, well, the book coach and I had gone through probably 4 or 5 drafts and thought, pretty solid story, no big plot holes. And probably half of my beta readers came back and said, this character, your main character, is not likable. They're like, I just wanted to slap him. He just seems too whiny. And I'm like, and I'm thinking, I'm trying to write him as a 17-year-old kid, which you tend to be kind of whiny then, you haven't figured things out. But I thought, well, that's enough people giving me the same feedback that's negative, that instead of, me curling up in a ball, I'm like, well, I might have to rewrite this a bit. I got to make him, a little nicer, a little less likely to get mad at the slightest thing. And in the next round, everyone thought it fixed the problem. So
excellent.
Yeah.
Well, Phil, it's been great talking to you, and a pleasure meeting you a couple months ago. Folks, go out there and buy his book. The second one's coming out, so now you can read a series. Nothing like the new year to get some let your imagination run wild, and that's what books allow you to do. So
it's a lot cheaper than flying over to France and trying to track all these places down too.
It is, but I like your idea about the
yeah.
That's what I did. Well, that's why I was in Europe, because I actually did some research for my next book, and I wanted to actually kind of feel it and walk it, and
right.
I've started writing it, then I've decided that I need a break. So I haven't really written it. I'm thinking about it. So I think I'm going to start back up here in the next couple of weeks or whatever. But I just need writing full time almost is like crazy.
Yeah.
Break. But great. It's been great. So what's the name of your book again, and where can we get it?
The first one is the Pontcourt Murders. So that's
the second one.
Second one is Murder in the Marais. So Pontcourt Murders takes place part in Paris and then a lot in rural France. The second book is all in Paris. So hopefully someone will buy it and enjoy it. I appreciate you having me on.
Oh, anytime. And folks, if you hear of a tour, of a Three Musketeers tour in Paris, and Phil's not on there, you need to tell that person Phil thought of it and send him some money, and know where you got the idea was right here on Author Eke.
That's right. Well, thank you very much.
Thanks, Phil. Appreciate it. Thank you.